Epstein and high-profile figures. Joining me now to break this down are David Carlucci, former New York State Senator, and Democratic strategist Taylor Hawthorne, Independent Women National Security Fellow and Republican strategist. Good morning to you both.
Good morning.
Hey, Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas, indeed. David, I want to jump in there, though, and ask you, though. Democrats have been criticizing the way that the DOJ has been handling this release of information. Will these documents affect public trust? And how should Democrats address this, particularly when point of concern seems to be keeping the privacy of many of these victims private?
Yeah, and Nick, it's not just Democrats, it's Republicans, it's independents. They want justice. And it's just so telling of the Trump administration, the fact that he pledged on the campaign trail, as well as his advisors and his team, that they would declassify the Epstein files. And that was the idea: drain the swamp, expose these criminals that have been preying on these victims. And you've heard that from Democrats, from Republicans, and now it seems like they'll do anything. Mr. Trump, the guy that could get anything done, he claims. He could end wars, but he can't release these documents. He doesn't have enough people, I guess, in the Department of Justice. They're finding any excuse to not drain the swamp, but to put a plug in the swamp and put more problems in it. So it's definitely an erosion of trust. And it's not just Democrats. This is a major problem for the MAGA movement, for the GOP, and especially for independents. And we see that in polling. And of course, it's hard to tell. Is it the economy, the price of groceries? Is it the erosion of trust because of this Epstein situation? It's all of those factors together. But I think this is leading the charge in why President Trump's approval ratings have been plummeting in these past couple months.
But Taylor, to suggest that only Democrats are concerned about protecting the privacy of these victims or want full transparency would be a fallacy. Correct me. With more material expected, what should be the party's long-term strategy on accountability?
Republicans have been very clear from the very beginning when Pam Bondi and the DOJ brought in a bunch of conservative influencers into the White House and essentially handed them a binder of nothing, that this was not good enough for us. I think that there is a deep systemic rot in this country that is up in the highest echelons of government and business. And we've seen that with the relationships that Epstein had. And Republicans, alongside Democrats, want to see this rot rooted out in our nation. I think the biggest thing that we're missing here when we're talking about this, we're so focused on whether it's Democrats and whether it's Republicans. Really, we need to be focused on the fact that there were thousands of young girls that were trafficked, American citizens who live in the borders, who operate under democratic rule of law in this country, who have the same rights that the three of us on this screen do and the same rights that that man on the screen does. And yet they were treated as less than human and subhuman, and no one protected them. And that is really what the focus of this conversation should be. And I also think that the left is doing a really good job of trying to dig into any crevice and any corner to try to see if Donald Trump is involved in this thing. And I've been the loudest advocate for whoever is involved needs to be called out for it. But I just don't think Donald Trump is it.
Oh, Taylor, I have a question for you there, because one of the things we've talked about, too, I just want to follow up on that. Republicans are seeing another wave of Epstein documents raise questions about Mr. Trump's ties, particularly with this new flight log information. How should the party respond if the documents increasingly implicate the president, even indirectly?
One of the biggest components of the Republican Party and one of our biggest talking points is right and wrong is wrong. And so if someone is implicated in it, then they should be implicated in it. But that photo that's flashing across the screen right now of President Trump happens to be one with a group of Hawaiian tropic models at a sunscreen event, during the, I believe, the 90s. And one of the women in that photo came out and said, he's an incredibly kind person. There was nothing apropos that happened there. There was nothing that should be concerning. And yet the left is continuing to show photos like that. Another photo that I saw this morning with a young girl and President Trump on an airplane was a photo of him and his daughter, and the photo was blacked out. And so that's what we're using as talking points to kind of implicate the president in this. And if there's real subject matter there, release it, talk about it. I think these files should be completely released. My dear friend, Tim Burchett, who serves on the House Oversight Committee, has been one of the loudest advocates of this, that it doesn't matter who is involved. Release the information, let the American people decide what to do with it. And I think a lot of the reason that the full information hasn't been released yet is I think a lot of things that are in there are going to be really scary and a hard pill to swallow for the American people. And I think that that's terrifying.
Across both political aisles. David, I'll give you the last 30.
Yeah, I think, look, I can't disagree with Taylor here on a lot of these issues. The problem is the Republican leadership disagrees. They've been slow walking the release of these files, and it just erodes the credibility. So the justification that my friend gave here, that these are Hawaiian tropic models or whatever, these are one-offs. And the problem is that you had Republicans stoking this fire, claiming that there was a cover-up, claiming that they would declassify all documents and that it was about transparency. This was going to be the most transparent administration ever. And we've got none of that. All we have is excuse after excuse. It's like the dog that caught the car, and they have no idea what they're doing. And at the same time, we have people that are waiting for justice, and they're not getting it. So it's a big problem for the GOP. I don't know how they're going to fix this. The only way they do that is by being more transparent, providing these documents, and let the American people decide for themselves.
David Carlucci, Taylor Hawthorne, thank you both for joining me on this Christmas Eve.
Great to be with you.
Here's a look at some of the other